today we're going to be painting a cute little bumblebee on a flower. So getting started with our tracing, I created an oval just slightly to the left of center, and I am putting in his cute little face, starting with his eye on the left, and then we're going to go ahead and put in the eye on the right. I'll come down, go ahead and just angle out his little left foot. And I'm going to come down and angle out his right foot. Now I'm putting these in, and they're more than likely going to get painted out at some point as we're drawing in our flower, but I want them there just so I can know more or less where he's supposed to sit in his world. Okay, I went and did a little bit of an oval for the midsection of his body. I'm trying to determine how far off the rest of his legs will be, and as he's going further back, the legs are a little bit larger than the ones in the front. At this time, I'm lightly sketching in the different parts of his body. And if you'll notice how my fingers sit really far back on the pencil, I'm trying to stay light. I don't want to push too hard on the paper, just because it'll make grooves, and the grooves will settle into the paint or may create ghost lines later that I'm trying to avoid. I put in his legs over on the right side of his body, putting in the back end of his little bottom, and then I'm going to bring out his wings. Now his wings have a bit of a triangular shape, so I'm making sure that I keep that triangular shape going. And then I'm going to come out from more or less the same area to on the left side of his body, and also build in that slightly triangular curved shape as it extends back and is foreshortened. Straightening up some details on his body and on his wings, just to make sure that they curve correctly. I'm really not going to do much more than this, just because the petals are going to be a little bit more free form. So we're going to go ahead and pull out our paints. I do use golden acrylics for majority of my paintings, especially if I plan to sell them. I am starting with some Prussian Blue at the bottom. Then putting out some burnt sienna, which I'll use for the background. I pulled out some Naples Yellow Hue on there. That particular Liquitex container was a little tough to open. It It's very soft compared to the other ones. So I was trying to twist it. It was just twisting the whole tube to the side. So that took a second of working to get it out. And on this one I used a cadmium red deep hue. I'm keeping the whole overall look a very earthy tonal look to it. I'm going to pull out some titanium white. I'm also going to add a little bit of Mars Black. I am going to wet my brush. I do want it fairly wet just so that as I'm blending, it blends well. I'm going to pick up some Cad Red Deep and start to put that, burnt sienna and a little bit of the Prussian blue over the top and just mix it loosely on the actual paper itself. I am using a bright, that is a shorter square top paintbrush. It is a number 6 silver black pearl 6402 bright. Now there are some areas that are a little bit lighter, so I'm going to add a bit of titanium in, go back in with some burnt sienna, and then just kind of mix and blend those two together. Now I am going around the bee and trying to avoid painting him completely out right away. I am putting in a lighter color of burnt sienna and where the wings are going to go, and then I'm coming back around with my Prussian blue and burnt sienna mix. I'm doing a fairly dark mix across the bottom left with quite a bit of Prussian blue and burnt sienna mixed together. Now it does take me a little bit more water than if you were working on a canvas, as because the paper is watercolor paper, and so it absorbs the water a bit more. I'm using cross hatching motions. I'll go left to right, I'll X over to help give it that blended look. I'm going to put in a little bit more black along the bottom of the flower center, and that'll help the petals stand out later. Now when you use black, just be very careful you don't put too much. A little bit of black will go a long way on there. Black will also dull and muddy out your colors, which we do want a muted tone here, but we want it to have some color. There is a ray of light going across, so I added a mix of Prussian Blue, burnt sienna, and white to it to kind of give that ray that's going to be traveling down from the back end. It does look quite light, so I'm going to darken that up, put a little bit of burnt sienna, black, and Prussian Blue. I do want to have that ray of light to have sort of a grayish feel to it. I'll add a little bit more water as well as we go. Add water as you need to. Sometimes if you feel like your strokes aren't quite creating the same effect, it might be that you just need more water on your brush. Try not to douse it completely, but just get enough on the bristles so that when you put it on the paper, that it does kind of help you mix and blend the acrylic around. Again, going back in with my Prussian Blue and the burnt sienna. So I'm working it back and forth, crisscrossing left and right, bringing in that color and blending it. I noticed there that it is quite gray, and I want to bring that blue tone to match the blue tone that we made at the bottom. So I'm going to go ahead and blend in a little bit of Prussian Blue and white. I'm going to go over to the sides now, adding a little bit of black to tone it down and darken it up. Prussian Blue, burnt sienna, and then adding water as needed. I do need to add a little bit more Prussian Blue back to my palette. And when I put my Prussian and my paint on there, in general, I try to use just a little bit at a time. I am in an area that's really humid, and the acrylic paint tends to dry out really fast because our ACs are always running. So I try to do just the smallest amount as I can, and if I need to put more, then I'll add more. Still going in with the Prussian Blue and the black, darkening it up over off to the right. Going back over on the line where the light meets the dark, and kind of just smoothing that out a bit so it transitions a little bit better. going to put in the stem. The stem is in shadow, so it's going to be pretty dark, and we'll put the stem in, and then in a minute I'll go in and we'll put in a little bit of highlight just to differentiate it from the background. I'm also not going to do the cross hatching here. I'm going to do more of a straight vertical stroke so that it also stands up off of the background. Adding in quite a bit of white here because I noticed that there are some pretty straight heavy lines, and I want it to really be light and then even across the whole beam as it comes down. Now, I haven't really cleaned my brush much just because I like the mixing, but I will occasionally wipe off on a napkin just to kind of remove some of the paint if I feel like there's too much. Smooth out some of that color, a little bit of the darker dabs that I left there. I'm going to clean out my brush really well. Pardon my arm, I'm trying a new angle on the camera. I am painted off to my left instead of off to my right, and I am right-handed, so I cross over. Okay, I'm flipping to a Filbert now. Sometimes called a Filbert, sometimes called a cat's tongue. Now this is a number 8 silver cat tongue, 410, that I'm using here to start putting in those really bright petals. I am getting majority of white, mixing in a tiny bit of that Prussian blue. I'm going to do like an underpainting layer, and I'm going to build up from the bottom, from the darker to the light. Now, since these are the bottom petals and I want them to have more of that one stroke technique, I am curving my hand over and under so that I can start from the outside petal and then kind of pull the way in. And then I'm not really mixing the paint on the brush, so you can see where there's the blue and the white and a tiny bit of burnt sienna are kind of just layered on there next to each other. I like that really impressionistic realism, so it's gonna have different streaks of colors going through it, so it'll be not quite mixed. You'll see me just go back and forth trying to grab paint. So the way I'm touching the end and then kind of pushing down as I go towards the center, and then lifting back up. The inside of the petal where it's touching the center, I'm not too worried about the shape of that. I'm really trying to get the shape of the outside petals, because that's going to give it that really flower shape. And the center will be covered up later with the stamen and the pollen. You notice I warmed up with the burnt sienna, the flowers going towards the left, and you can kind of see it mimicked in the painting. where the left hand of the background has more of the burnt sienna in it, and the right hand of the background has more of the Prussian blue and the black in it, just to show the differences in light and where light is coming from and where light is hitting. Now, if the petals are elongated, I'm using a left-right stroke. So I'll stroke out one way and then I'll come back the other. This is an under layer though. It's an under, I guess almost an underpainting. It's a bottom layer. So there will be other layers on top and we'll get lighter and lighter. I'm going to add some more white. Invest in white. I do have an 8-ounce tube of white versus the 2-ounce tubes that I usually use of my other colors, because I do a lot of mixing with white. I do have a larger 8-ounce black, but I've kind of gotten away from just using plain black, and I try to do a lot of chromatic blacks, and I'll create blacks with the different colors when I need them. It helps kind of keep the tone consistent, so that it, if it's a dark brown tree, then it's going to have darker brown shading to it and things like that. But sometimes black is just nice to have to get a nice darker area. So I put in some white, and what I'm trying to put in here is some highlights. And then just kind of watching the way the strokes are going to go. Now it's not completely white, it's mostly white, because we are still going to do some lighter layers at the top. So just a tiny bit of white from your paintbrush with a little bit of the color that was still on there mixed on top. So you'll see me grabbing from the sides closer to where the burnt sienna and some of the other blue mixture were that we had created. I picked up a tiny bit of burnt sienna and then just mixed up quite a bit more white on there. And you can always go a little bit darker and then let it dry and then lighten it up. And then follow the shape that you created on the under layer of your petals so that you don't lose that. You'll notice that the bee is getting mostly painted out. The bee was drawn just to kind of help me place it on the actual painting itself, and then I will go back in and then paint over it later. I don't usually retrace unless I'm if I do retrace, it'll be with paint itself, and it'll just be gesture painting, drawing kind of style. Again, over to the right side where it's a little bit darker blue, I'm going to bring in some more of that Prussian. Try to keep the strokes quick and light, and just bring them fluid straight down as much as you can. If you try to do little daubs, it's not going to have the same effect. So, plant your brush tip and just pull and follow the curve of the petal. Come around. Grab some more of that Prussian blue. There are some shadows from some top petals that we're going to have to go back in and put in a moment. There's one. And then there's a petal over the top of it. So I added a little bit of Prussian, swiped, added a little bit more white, and swiped just so that you could have that petal, shadow petal going over the top. Grabbed a little bit of a whiter white with very little mixed into it to get some of those highlights. There is some shadows from a couple of petals that are going to be on the top there, so I'm bringing in some of that shading right now. I'm adding in some of those petals that are at the, above it. Those are going to be some of my lightest petals. So there's quite a bit of white, just pure white on there. I am bringing in just a little bit more color on those petals on the left. A little bit of Prussian Blue. And then I'll come back and define some of the shadows and some of the highlights of the top flowers as well. Now I'm taking some Prussian and some of the burnt sienna and putting in some textured edges and some shading underneath some of those petals just so that you can see the underside of the petal, creating a little bit of drama. Now I'm going to put some burnt sienna and some shadows around the petals, leaves where they touch the center. Putting in some texture along the edge of each petal or there are different areas of the petal just so that so you want your central subject to stand out, but you also don't want it to stand out so much that it pops off the page. You do want it to have some cohesiveness with the background that it's on, so I'm adding in some of those darker Prussian blue areas and burnt sienna areas just to kind of match with the background. Okay, I'm going to go back in and add a couple of really high highlights, just pure white across some of the petals. am painting in those black back petals because of the bees. Their wings are rather transparent, so even though we mostly won't see those back petals, we may see them peeking through, and I don't want to leave any canvas that looks like it just has these random spots or missing areas of paint. So we will go ahead and paint in those back petals even though they're not in the quite seen in the photograph. We know that they exist. Bringing in some more highlights on the petals so they stand out a little bit more. I'm going to go ahead and start putting in some burnt sienna. I moved over to a smaller filbert. That one was a Simply Simmons number 6, and it is a filbert from the extra large Simply Simmons line. It's a pretty inexpensive brush. I got it off of the Brush Guys for like maybe $3 or $4. They were not that expensive, but it's a pretty decent brush, especially if you're just starting out, or even if you've been painting for a while. They do have a nice spring to them. I'm using the Prussian Blue to put in some shadows and some shading. And then the burnt sienna mixed with some Prussian Blue just to tone the dark center area, because I'm going to use more yellow and more white for that center part, and we want it to stand out as we're putting in those little stamens. Now I'm using the very tip of the filbert, and I am kind of dabbing back and forth there, trying to make these little almost cylindrical L's back and forth. So you'll see me kind of turning and just lightly touching the paper with the paint brush, and then toning it with that Naples Yellow. I'm cleaning my brush off a bit just because I don't want to have that burnt sienna and the Prussian Blue muddying up that white and that yellow that we're doing on the top. And I'm going to just dab along and put in the lighter coats. Don't go straight to white, because again, you want to build up, you want some tones underneath to help build depth. So you can see there where the white is sitting over the top of that Prussian Blue, and you can really tell the difference between it. It does have a bit of a yellow color from the Naples. and that kind of helps to differentiate it from the petals, and so you can see it turning into a flower. And I just keep going all the way around as I build in towards the center of the flower with that maple yellows and white mix. You can see it's really coming in, so I'm going over the top with more of my white. Really bringing up and building that whole flower. And I know most of the bee is gone now, but we really, like I said, I needed to know where the bee was going to live so that I could see where he was going to sit on the flower and what I needed to draw and make sure I had painted. I'm building up in some more just plain solid white. Now I'm going over the top of the areas that I had already painted those lighter yellow parts on there, just to give some highlights to it. It's starting to look pretty good. Add a little bit of water in my brush, just because I'm not trying to dry brush it on there. I'm going to clean that out. That looks good the way it is. Now I'm coming back through with my it is a round number 4 silver from the black pearl, and I'm going to put in some finer highlights on the petals themselves. Now, if you're wondering why I didn't use the round for the center part, I really like the filbert because it, like, as soon as you dab, it creates that little oval oval line. And then with a round, yeah, you can, but sometimes I have a tendency of pressing too hard, and then I end up with weird lines or shapes. So now I'm going to go in with just my solid pure white and put in some very deliberate highlights, and then dab there. And I'm not worried about the shape of it because they're gonna, it's a highlight over a lot of texture already. And I very lightly touch just a small pieces in the middle, um, but I'm not using it to draw solid lines there. And if you're ever wondering why maybe your painting looks flat, um, sometimes it's because we stick to one brush and we forget to vary the way we use the brush either, because you can do dots with a bristle, you can do lines with a bristle, um, you can do petals with a bristle if you know how to control the brush. But for some people, just varying the type of brush you use changes the line and creates more of an expressive painting when you use different sizes and shapes of brushes. And rounds are really good for details. So right through here, I'm coming through and kind of like making sure that I have the shape of petals correct and that the shadowing or the shading is correct and putting that in where I need to. Now don't completely paint out those expressive bolder strokes that you put under. You still want to see those in your painting. Here I'm just picking some spots to put in some highlights. And then I do have a tendency of overdoing it, so I also have to tell myself to stop sometimes. Going over the top with white, but making sure to keep some of the darker areas on those layers below. And then shaping out some of those petals where we may have taken out the background or they need a little bit more definition. Now again, with that stem, we're just going straight down. We're not doing any sideways cross hatching or anything like that because we do want it to look like the stem of the flower and not the background itself, but it will stay very muted. Now for the center area over the flowers, I didn't want it too dark, so I'm coming back over with some of that titanium white, but I do want to show some of the differentiation in the petals without it being like too much of a straight line. You don't unless you're deliberately doing it, you don't want to draw lines when you're painting, unless that's the style you're going for, which you can go for a very graphic style if you want. But this is more of a loose impressionistic painting that we're looking at here. And finally getting into that Cad Red Deep to do the actual bee's face. Putting back in his eyes and his little face, and then his body. And so here I am just, like I said earlier, I am just drawing with the paint, essentially. Mixing in some of that Naples yellow, giving it a nice orangey underpainting. Now I'm following the shape of the bee's body, so you'll see that my strokes are curved there, so that it has a bit of that expressiveness that I was looking for. A little bit of Cadmium Red Deep, a little bit of Burnt Sienna. I'm going to start darkening up my bee, his little face. It is fairly wet, so the paint is kind of just smoothing around. Putting in some Prussian Blue for my darks. Just putting in his little foot. I'm going to bring in his other foot. So I'm painting in his legs. Now I haven't cleaned my brush, so it does have Prussian Blue, Burnt Sienna on there. A little bit of the Cad Red Deep. Some Naples Yellow closer to the body. Just to give it some highlighting effects. Some more Naples Yellow, just a little bit of Burnt Sienna to get in all those legs and to just vary the tones on them so that you can see the different parts of him. And since bees do have those bold little stripes, I went ahead and put those in with some Prussian Blue. Putting in that coloring across the top of its body. Nice hide. They have some highlights, so I'm going to go ahead and lighten areas up. Bring in some more Naples Yellow, White, and Cadmium Deep. You'll notice my strokes are kind of light. The paintbrush itself, I'm not pushing down on the tip of that round very much. Nor am I mixing. A lot of the mixing gets done on the canvas itself. Filbert Sienna. And go back with some white, go over the top of his head. There is still Cad Deep and Burnt Sienna on my paintbrush, so you'll see that kind of start to mix around in there. The eye is a little bit darker though, so I'm going to make sure I keep putting my Prussian Blue back in. I'm putting in some details for his little legs, some shading underneath. Just dotting it in there lightly. It does have some fuzzy, brighter areas underneath his little legs are not quite in shadow, so I put those in. And then I'm going to go ahead and get some Naples Yellow and some white and paint those wings back in. Of course, if you've noticed, my wings now are not in the same spot that I thought I was going to put those in, and that's okay. I'll come in with some of the background colors, and we'll cover all that back up in a minute. I'm going to paint in some of that veining. Using some pure white over the top of some of those of the veined areas that we put in. Now the wing that was a little further away is not quite as in focus, so it doesn't have as much detail as the wing that's closer to us. That's on his right, our left. And then now I'm going to go ahead and just paint back some of that background. And I'm just making sure that I blend it in. And again, the background has kind of like a cross hatching that I did to it. So I'll just make sure that I stay true to that. I'm going to widen his wing a little bit. Bring in some color to match him up to his body. Just a little bit of Naples in there. And you can see that we did cover up most of that background, but there's a few little areas where it peeks through. And then anything we took out, we kind of just putting it back in with a little bit of Prussian. And making sure that we do some highlighting there on his wings on the other side. Keeping that triangular shape. It is a Naples yellow and a white mix. And then some detailing in just pure white. Painting back in some of those flowers that we lost when we fixed the background. And I'm kind of smoothing them out since it's a different brush that we're using there. I am going to try to change out the angle so that you can kind of see a little bit better when I'm painting and I'm having to kind of like go over the top. Hoping to get some new equipment in soon, so that I can do that and work with different setups. And so see how that works, what we can do there. Okay, we're getting closer to the end here. I'm just putting in some details, uh, coloring on the top of his body with a little bit of that burnt sienna. Some of the highlighting around his nose and his face. Putting in some shine on his eye on both sides. And thank you for painting with me today. If you stayed with me this far, I do appreciate it. If you have any questions or if there's something else you'd like to see or a suggestion you'd like to make, go ahead and feel free to leave it in the comments. This is a learning experience for me, so I'm always open to suggestions and to see how, different ways that something could work. I do hope that you enjoyed this painting today. If you give it a try, let me know. Go to my webpage and check out Me Contreras Artist Life and show me what you've done and what you've worked on and see how we're going on this journey together. And for the last final little bits, I do have a round. It is a number 0 round that I'm putting in just some details on his little legs and around his body so that we can see his different little parts of him, just to kind of finalize and finish him up. I'm going into the burnt sienna, darkening up area under his wing, towards his back, fixing up his little leg a little bit. The glare from the light was a little bright, so putting my hand over created a shadow that let me see kind of how it was turning out. I didn't like the way that red looked on the background, so I painted it out with the Prussian just to keep it dark in that background. All right, well, thank you so much for joining me today. We're going to go ahead and finish this off now. And again, don't forget to like and subscribe. And thank you for joining my my YouTube channel today.